responsibility and theater. It's a bit of a esoteric discussion, a little vague, and some discussion around what responsibility even is. On our panel today, we have Alexander Offord. He's with the company Good Old Neon. He's also our new play contest winner this year with his show Potosi. We have Megan Mooney from Mooney on Theatre, who has reviewed already every single show at the Fringe. So please give a huge round of applause. And we have Marjorie Chan from Cahoots Theatre Company, a wonderful, diverse theatre company that I've been a fan of since I've started doing theatre in this city. So give her a round of applause. Okay, so I kind of want to start off light, because I guess it could be a bit of a heated discussion, the idea of this. So, we hear about artists, or holding artists and reviewers and audiences responsible for their art or their reviews or their response to any given show. But how would you define responsibility in this context? And is there such a thing as responsibility in theater? So I guess we'll start with you, Alexander.
Okay. So it's a heavy question. I guess there are a few kind of ways you can sort of parse this out. Like for me, there's a weird thing now in the 20th century where art is a commodity, right? So you pay X amount of dollars for this thing, which is your ticket, to have an experience which lasts Y long, which makes you feel Z, which is hopefully entertaining. And so, to that extent, I think, yes, you maybe have a responsibility to give a good evening, to entertain, but that's not true for all systems. That's not true in the gift economy, for example. Wouldn't have been true in Sophocles' time or something. The other way you can kind of think about it is the responsibility in terms of the content. Like, do we have a responsibility to kind of accurately picture the world on our stage? Do we have a responsibility to behave in good faith in terms of the kinds of people we represent and be fair to them and to treat them well? And then I guess there's another kind of responsibility, which is like, do we have a responsibility to instruct or be kind of moral ambassadors to the world? And I think there's probably a lot of opportunity for me to expand on those points later on, but I think for me, the answer's got to be no, we don't have any of those responsibilities.
All right, starting out light. Okay, Megan.
Okay, so from the sort of reviewer's critic point of view, I'm going to just speak from Mooney on Theatre's point of view, because one of the core tenets of Mooney on Theatre is that I say over and over and over again to my writers is that they can only speak for themselves. And so we have a responsibility to speak from our experience and to make it clear that what we're saying is about what we've experienced and what we have seen. And so another thing that we do that is not necessarily what all people do is that I feel that it's really important for us to respect the work that has gone into producing what we see on stage. So that doesn't for a second mean pretend that we liked something if we didn't. But it means be respectful when we're saying that we didn't. So we work really hard to make sure that there are no personal attacks and there are no just sort of gratuitous, because it's a really good line, it gets to go in there. I remember one line that was such a great line and so hard to cut out, but had to come out, which was the closing line of a review, which was a writer wrote, so perhaps in the future the playwright will choose to masturbate in private instead of in public. And I was just like, okay, that's a brilliant line. but there's no way it is going to be published in Mooney on Theatre. You know, like it's because that's just not what Mooney on Theatre is about. And so this is what I mean by what we do is not necessarily representative of all critics, because there might be other critics where that would be something that they would say because it is clever and witty and will get clicks and hits and will get sent around and things like that. So for us, it's about respecting our readers and respecting the people on stage.
Right, because I guess as a blog, you don't have to worry about, not necessarily your readers, but there's no publication to worry about other, because you run it, right? So you don't have to worry about like, well, we got to get that tagline in there so we can get more, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And so what I always say when we have training sessions with our writers and things like that, what I always say to my writers, and this works better if they have a theater background, and not all our writers do, but is think of it as though you are a director giving notes. And so, pretend that you're going to have to work with these people in the future. And so you're going to have to, at some point, if you're a director, say, this isn't working for me. Here are some ways that it would maybe work better for me. And do it in a way that is not going to make those people feel completely belittled, and they're going to be able to move forward with that and take it moving forward.
Great. Thank you, Megan. Margaret?
Yes, so just to follow up on what Alexander was talking about, the kind of other modes that I think of responsibility in terms of, here are kind of the difference between personal responsibility and the public responsibility of an artist, or the public responsibility of an artist while actually engaged in a theatrical act. And my personal responsibility to you, because it's a civil society, because it's Canada, I'm quite polite, and I'll look everyone in the eye and I'll shake your hand, and we'll always have a conversation no matter who you are or what reviewer you are or which reviewer you are. But at the same time, my responsibility as an artist myself it runs slightly different. And as well, further, as an artistic director, further than that, my responsibility to speak on behalf of others, and perhaps artists who aren't able to speak for themselves, is even more significant. I just wanted to share with you a little something, a quote that better articulates what I think the role of the artist should be, better than I could say it. So I'm just going to read this to you. It's from an article called "The Social Responsibility of the Artist" by Howard Richards. And this is what he has to say. The social responsibility of the artist is to improve the public's taste. To say that the work of the artist bears fruit when it is appreciated by an audience is not to say that the artist is the servile puppet of the public. He is not. The artist does not create for the sake of applause. His art is not a manipulation of levers with the intent to maximizing pleasure. The term artist is an honorific term. Part of what is meant by it is that the person so honored has integrity. Artistic integrity excludes pandering to the public. It requires commitment to some standard of excellence other than public applause. What that other standard is varies widely. It may be craftsmanship, that is to say maintenance of high technical standards in the use of the medium. It may be coherence or truthfulness in detail in respects the public is not likely to notice. It may be a message, something the artist feels called to say whether or not the public wants to hear it. It may be a new language the public does not yet understand and perhaps will never understand. Or it may be a vision or commitment appreciated only by the artist himself. As an example, Gertrude Stein wrote that at one point Picasso saw things in a new way, a way in which no one else saw them, and in which no one else had ever seen them. It was only later, through Picasso's efforts, that others came to share this way of seeing. Whatever the artist's standard of excellence is, it is not pleasing the public. Instead, it sets him apart from the public as an independent force. If it were not so, he would lack integrity, and for this reason, he would not be an artist. So that sums up a lot of what my opinion of what the responsibility of an artist is. This is a sign that I have on my wall at the office, which sums it up even better, I think, and it's much shorter. Tom's looking at me. And this is it. And it's a quote you're probably familiar with. art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed. It has been variously attributed. I believe it's from Cesar Chavez, and though I believe Banksy uses it quite freely without attribution.
Okay, great, thank you. That was actually a wonderful quote. Both. Thank you. Okay, so the next question is more specific, I suppose. And so we all have our own definitions of what our responsibility is, even if it's none. What do you think is the responsibility of the theater artist to its audience?
I suppose it's back to me now. Oh, God. Well, see, I thought actually that first quote you had was really, really good, and I agree with a lot of it. It becomes very, very complicated to talk about this stuff because there are so many different senses in which one can mean responsibility. Ultimately, though, I'm not sure how many of them are healthy for artists to really think about, because if you get too caught up in thinking about, like, when most artists sit down to create a thing, whether it's a play or a poem or a score for augmented pianos, I don't think they sit down with some sort of simple soundbite of a thesis that they are trying to communicate. I think if they did, they would write essays, they wouldn't create art. And so if you think too much about kind of getting into granular, particular kinds of things that you're communicating to people and what you want them to walk away with from the piece, you can go crazy because you're never going to get there. I think the best you can do is kind of do a work that you would want to see, that you're proud of, and that is very, very slippery and doesn't yield a particularly enthralling answer to your question. But that's sort of the truth of it. I don't think you can worry about the other stuff.
Yeah, so basically sharing your own personal experience to an audience. That's the artist's responsibility.
Well, I think you have to a priori share your own personal experience because you don't have any other experiences to share.
That's true.
Now, there's a whole other conversation we could get into about appropriation of voice and that kind of stuff, but we don't necessarily have to get into that discussion today.
It's on here. Megan.
I don't know. I mean, I think that it's a hard one. I mean, it's a hard one to answer. This sounds like a cop-out answer, but I kind of think that you're responsible to yourself. I think that one thing I was thinking when you were answering is I was thinking about when you were talking about not having a meaning and then trying to create a piece of art and come up with that meaning. Is I was thinking about art therapy work that I've done, where you sit down and you start making art in some way with whatever is around you. And I've done it in various forms of art. And then you sit down and you look at the art and you figure out where the hell that came from and what that meant. And I suspect, I mean, that's not necessarily art in the professional sense of like someone making their living, but I suspect that someone making their living probably makes art in a pretty similar way. And I think that when you're making your art, you're responsible to yourself. And that then there's maybe a whole other kind of responsibility when you start trying to market your art. And I mean, in terms of playwriting, for instance, like at some point then you start working with a dramaturg and you start working with a theater company and you start trying to produce it. And that's a whole other piece. But the raw putting it down on paper, you're responsible to yourself first. And I think that if you're not trying to do that, something will be missing from your piece. And that's just my gut feeling.
Great, okay.
In terms of responsibility of the artist to the audience, I certainly think that an artist needs to acknowledge their relationship with an audience. I think actually that's the most important definition that's useful to me, is that I need that the form that I work in is stage form. It's live. It's in front of people. So it does necessarily involve people attending it. So whether what happens when that audience sees my piece of work, that's something else entirely. But certainly for me personally, there's not a responsibility to that audience. I would say in terms of my aesthetic, it's shifted much over time. It's like in some of my plays and some of my works, I want to hold the audience really, really carefully, like a baby bird, so that I can whisper, platitudes into their ear. Maybe they'll hear me in a different way. And in other pieces, I want to hit them over the head. But those are my choices. Those are my choices, my aesthetic choices. And so that responsibility to my own aesthetic, I think weighs higher than my responsibility to how an audience might receive it.
Yeah, that's interesting, the difference between responsibility to your aesthetic and responsibility to how your audience is going to perceive it, because we don't know how they're going to perceive it. Okay, so now let's shift over to reviewers. So what do you think is the responsibility of the theater reviewer to its readers, to the theater community as a whole, to the artists they review, to their publication?
I think this is also tricky, and I think it has to be contextual. What needs to be taken into consideration when reading reviews, the forum under which that review is being given. Like an academic critique is a very different kind of a review that appears in a major newspaper, which is a very different kind of review that appears on a blog. And so I think that it's the reviewer's job to kind of just be. I don't think there's anything particularly wrong with any one kind of criticism, as long as the reviewer is acting in good faith and is honest about what kind of criticism they're giving. It would be wrong, I think, for a reviewer to mislead their readership about what is driving review, the impetus for review. Like, the kinds of review that you're going to get on a forum that is mostly owned by major corporations is going to be colored in certain ways that I think reviewers should be conscious of. That in ways that independent blogs are not. But I mean, to a large extent, it's not really my field.
In that case, Megan.
I think that contextualization is really important, actually, because one of the things, specifically with Mooney on Theater, when I started it, I started it really specifically aimed actually at non-theater people. And so one of the things that I really push my writers to do is write things that aren't filled with theater jargon and that aren't, even though most of our readers are theater people, I'm not crazy, I do know that. But I still push for this because I still have this pipe dream that someday non-theater people will read it and we'll have way more people going to the theater. I really push for these reviews that are not filled with theater jargon and that aren't these in-depth analyses of what's on stage, which in fact makes it incredibly hard for me to write reviews within my own editorial guidelines, because I see a show and I just want to go home and geek out and write these big theater geek reviews, and in fact I always have to edit out all the theater geek stuff of my own reviews. And we get criticized for that sometimes. And so I think that contextualization is a really important thing, because I'm always like, actually there are lots of places where those reviews exist, and the whole point of me starting Mooney on Theater was that those reviews weren't existing, and that Mooney on Theater, I started it because there weren't those reviews. So. But anyway, in terms of, so I think the contextualization is incredibly important. In terms of responsibility, I don't know. I mean, I also started it because I was honestly pretty uncomfortable with some of the reviews that were out there that were super snarky. Really, I mean, I feel like we have a responsibility to be honest. I think that it would be disrespectful for us to say that we liked something if we didn't like it. I think that there's, I don't know, for a long time there was this feeling going around that Mooney on Theater only wrote positive reviews, and I think that which was not true. Like, we have been blacklisted by theaters before because we've done negative reviews of their stuff, but I think it's because people just weren't used to the fact that if it was not a positive review, it was still nice. And I just think it would be disrespectful to only do positive reviews. So I think that respect piece is incredibly important to me. And I think that, to me, that's a part of the responsibility that I think is missing in some places, that respect piece.
It's interesting, you said how, before we were talking about the artist is responsible to their own aesthetic.
Yeah.
But you edit yourself out of your own aesthetic, so it's so interesting. It's the opposite for you.
It's true. I do edit myself out of my own aesthetic, except that I edit myself within the aesthetic of the publication.
Right. So you've set up the aesthetic around it. Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Margaret.
I guess I have lots to say on the subject, but I booked to flip the table for 7. So. Some of this for me is that, interestingly, as an artist, as a person, I don't read, and only John knows this, I don't read any of your reviews, with much respect to the readers. I don't read any of them, not for my works, and not for your reviews of my colleagues' works or other people in the community. And I only actually do read a review when it gets put in front of me, because someone says, you must read this, or in my position as artistic director. And that's partly because part of what I believe, an artist's point of view, is that actually it's a different ecosystem. The review system is a different world that's happening over here. I don't necessarily have to have a dialogue with that ecosystem. I can if I choose, but I personally don't choose to. It was really interesting when Kelly Nestrup came here from the UK. He was very active on Twitter, and right away people were engaging with him. And I, at first I was like, why are they engaging with him? They don't have to engage with him. But I actually saw the value of that, and grew to respect that. Grew to respect the reviewers that put themselves in the public eye, because it gave us a very clear point of view from where they were coming from. And the more open that they were and transparent from where the position they were coming from, the better ability we had to be able to read their reviews, as a matter of fact. You know everything about a lead artist who puts their play on the stage. There's a million interviews or whatever, etc. Though less so now that there's indie publications dying, goodbye grid. But at the same time, from the reviewer's point of view, we don't know them. But as they've been more active on social media, we do get to know them. And the only thing I'll say to this point is, like, it kind of in defense of reviewers. At one point, Glenn Sumi tweeted in the middle of a factory show at intermission that he didn't. I can't remember the exact quote. He had a bit of a negative reaction to the show he was in the middle of seeing with that intermission, and he tweeted that, and he got a huge backlash for tweeting in the middle of a show, which was quite interesting. In the end, I think his overall review of the show was that he didn't like it. A week later, he tweeted in the middle of a show from Soul Pepper, and he said he loved it. I'm in the middle of a show, I haven't finished watching it, but I loved it. And Soul Pepper retweeted it, and other people retweeted it, and everybody retweeted it. And it was pretty interesting to me because, as a theatrical community, we accepted that Glenn could say something positive in the middle of a show without having seen the end of the show, but what was his right to say something negative in the middle of the show? He didn't say he was leaving. He just said, "So far, I don't like it." In any case, it was an interesting moment to me because at that point, as I said, with social media, you get a stronger sense of who these people are who are behind these reviews.
Interesting. Okay, so we've hit artists, we've hit reviewers. I also want to talk about the audience. So what do you think is the audience's responsibility when attending theater?
Sure.
Want to go first? Go for it. Yeah, we'll go first. Yeah.
Again, I'll speak personally, and that I don't think I don't think I have any responsibility. There's, again, what we talked about, the social responsibility. That as Canadians, I'll be polite, I'll turn off my phone. She told me to turn off the phone, but I don't have to. I just do so because it's more civil. But I don't have to. So for my expectations, do I want anarchy at my shows and everyone tweeting and phones going off? Not necessarily, but in fact that it should be the freedom of the audience to be able to do that, should they feel that, you know. But that's how I feel about that.
Great. Okay, that's good.
I agree with Marjorie on this one. I think that, you know, audiences, it would be really nice if they would, you know, not heckle during live performance or throw things. But you know, there are a lot of shows that in fact would encourage that, and that's their prerogative. I don't think an audience owes anything to what they're seeing, and they paid the price of the ticket, so you know, it's their experience just as much as
So you
ours.
feel the artist owes them something at this point, basically.
I wouldn't go that far. I wouldn't go that far. No, like the theater is a shared space. It's a subjunctive space. It's for having experience of which the audience is a part of. Even in the most artificial theater, even in, you know, Robert Wilson's abstract expressionism, which, you know, it might as well be projected on the screen for all the interaction with the audience it encourages. It's still a shared space, and anything that happens within that space is part of the experience of the work.
Yeah, Megan.
One of my favorite audience experiences is when I go to see a show at YPT, at Young People's Theater. Ideally, when the kids I'm there with are somewhere in the like grade 4 to 6 age range, because it's an age range where they can get engaged enough to be really wrapped in with what's going on stage, but don't have the inhibitions that we have all in the sort of theatrical rules that we've all built for ourselves. And so there will be just this chorus of oohs and ahs and oh, and I love that. I love that feeling of people reacting and that communal response to what's happening on stage. And I wish that happened as adults. And I have to say that so I have a fairly large laugh, and and the number of times that I'm at shows where it's a funny show and I laugh and people look back and glare at me, and I'm like, a funny thing happened on stage and I'm laughing. Why is this bad? And so I think sometimes we go too far with our rules around audiences and stuff. On the other hand, it drives me crazy if people have their phones out and stuff, because it's about distracting the actors and stuff like that. But on the other hand, in theory, they're professionals and they're being paid to be up there. But it's also about distracting me as an audience member. Like if you've got a flashy thing there, like I probably didn't, but let's pretend I did. And there are times when I paid to be there, but someone paid to be there, and they paid their money, and they deserve to not be distracted by your friggin' light up thing. And so that kind
Even
of
if they're
stuff.
tweeting that they like the show?
Even if they're tweeting that they like the show, because they can wait for intermission.
Right, great.